So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Welcome to another edition of Cal's Corner here on the X Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Folks, as for those of you who listen to the show hopefully regularly, you know that we cover everything from politics to the paranormal, and today's not going to be an exception to that, so let's get into today's show. First of all, a quick update. I've received some feedback regarding last week's show, and I want to thank everybody who has given me some feedback. I always appreciate the feedback, regardless of what it is. And I agree with some of this feedback. The short version of which, to sum it up, was that I could have done a better job and should have done a better job on talking about the issue of journalists being killed and so on. And I agree with that. It's a subject that is obviously something that I have an emotional attachment to because I have friends who are journalists who have been killed by terrorists. Perhaps the most famous friend of mine who died in a terrorist attack a couple of years ago in Pakistan, and of course living in neighboring India, it drove the point home a bit closer for me personally. But his name was Kiram Zakai, and I published an article that saluted him after he was killed. The short version of what happened is Kiram was a friend of mine for many years in Pakistan. He was an independent journalist. He refused one day on a TV network to say what the government wanted him to. He refused to essentially kiss their butt and be politically correct. He condemned terrorism. He condemned Islamic extremism. Although he was a Muslim, a bit on the conservative side, and me being Jewish, I was his only Jewish friend as far as I knew. And it doesn't matter whether he had one Jewish friend or a million, it's irrelevant. What I found that was truly great about the man and my friend is that even if you disagreed, he would always listen and you could always talk. And there were many times where he would come around to your point of view because he could see beyond his own initial reactions, if you will, or biases or prejudices. And of course, everybody has them. So we were going to visit each other. I was going to come to Pakistan to visit him. But the Indian government put the kibosh on that, and I'm not criticizing them for doing it, but here's the reality of what happened. When I first went to go to India as a tourist, not to live there, that was the second time, I had to sign a statement to get that visa that I would do no reporting or journalism for the first 6 months that I was in the country. Now, in India, a standard tourist visa is for 6 months. It's not 90 days. It's actually 6 months. So I agreed not to do any journalism, no reporting, nothing, not even posting anything on the internet, even remotely close to that, while I was in India. And I mentioned to the worker at the embassy in Prague that I was going to try to visit my friend Kiram in Pakistan and then go to India. Or I might venture into Pakistan, then go back to India. They put the kibosh on that. They said that if I were to deal with Pakistan first and go there, that they would delay my visa, they would take their time processing it, and it's better that I just do that later if I'm going to do it at all. And we never did meet each other in person, but we remained in touch many times. I would see things he would write. I'd try to have some of them translated because they were often not in English. And then what would happen is I'd give him feedback. And I remember that as he increased his activities towards condemning terrorism and acts of violence against journalists, promoting free speech, equality among religions. He wanted to see Muslims stop persecuting Jews and Christians. What happened is he started to, of course, offend and upset some of the Stone Age types that live in a backwards world that should never have existed. And I'm talking about people who force women to cover themselves, who believe that Christians and Jews should be killed just because they're not Muslims, who believe that if you're a Muslim and you happen to leave that faith, that you should be hunted down and murdered, that women who dress Western style should be raped because they're daring to show skin and they're trying to tempt and seduce men. Men can't control themselves. It's always the woman's fault. This type of backward stupidity I've seen a lot of in various countries, especially in very sexist countries like India. And although it's a bit better than the backwardness and sexism that is rampant in Pakistan, Pakistan is, of course, a militant Islamic government. Let's be honest about the subject here, and they do support terrorism, especially against India. And, of course, they're supported by everybody from the Saudis to Communist China, because Communist China, of course, does everything it can to poke India in the proverbial eye. So what Karam was doing is he was increasing his protests against acts of terrorism and radical Islamic clerics. And there is a particular cleric down there who is the cleric for what is called the Red Mosque. And he is the individual that I explained in my article about his death, Karam's death, that he is probably the person that took the contract hit out on Karam and had him killed. Karam was gunned down, assassinated in a restaurant while having some tea in the evening after work. Some men came in on a motorcycle, like right out of a Hollywood movie, drew their pistols and emptied them into him and his friend. He died and bled out at the spot. Police to this day have not prosecuted anybody. They're not going to because they don't want themselves to be killed. And the government doesn't care. It's just another journalist who wants freedom, liberty, genuine democracy. Why should the government of Pakistan support anybody like that? They don't. They kill people like that. Because as long as Pakistan continues to have the corrupt government that it does, including the comical latest reincarnation of it run by an actor who hates Jews, by the way, Pakistan can twist in the wind as far as I'm concerned. It is a failed country by choice. So yes, I have lost friends in the past, journalists, to people who have killed because they didn't like what they said or they didn't like what they stood for. Terrorists having killed these journalists, some of them. Others were just killed in the line of duty covering events in war zones, things like that. So where it concerns an update of what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, the update is this. The Saudis have now admitted that he was murdered. Well, no kidding. That was always obvious. So their story has gone from he left the embassy, we don't know what happened to him, to he got in a fist fight and was accidentally killed, to he was murdered. And now they claim they're going to hold all the guilty people responsible and bring them to justice, try them in Saudi Arabia. Well, that's an insult to anybody who wants real justice. I agree for once, which is a rare occasion, with the government of Turkey and its elected dictator, Tayyip Recep Erdogan, that those who are guilty of this crime should be tried in Turkey, and they should be given throw the book at them, because what they did is outrageous. It must not be allowed to stand. Unfortunately, it will be allowed to stand from the standpoint of there is no individual that I know of whose life is deemed to be so important that it might fundamentally alter relations between some countries if that individual were killed. And I must include the United States into that mix. It is a fact that the United States for many decades, especially in Latin America, has backed failed regimes. Latin America is a backwater type area. I don't know of a single country in Latin America that is functioning normally, decently, that is delivering on its promises of its people to give them so-called life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Instead, they're all failed economies, dictatorships, murders run rampant there, everywhere from Mexico down into Brazil. It is a failed continent, and one of the consequences of that is this massive displacement of migrants. Millions of people have fled socialist Venezuela because socialism doesn't work. So where are they going to go? Well, some of them are trying to go to America. Some of them are going to nearby countries, trying to survive, trying to better themselves. I understand all of that. We must remember that in countries where there are dictatorships, where the press is a beacon of hope and a voice for freedom and change and justice and democracy, certain governments don't like that. They like to eliminate the press. And so what happened in the case of Khashoggi, he was killed because he dared to criticize the current leadership of the Saudi royal family, especially its young crown prince, MBS, who likes to be called by MBS. And as I wrote in an editorial in the Daily World newspaper the other day, again, his murder cannot be allowed to stand. And unfortunately, it's going to be allowed to stand, meaning that you can never bring him back to life. You can never, even if you executed the guilty, atone for the sin of the crime of murder, what they did. On the other hand, you could alter your relationships with Saudi Arabia so that this type of thing cannot ever happen again. I don't know if the United States is going to do that. To be honest, I don't know if it any longer holds the moral framework or interest in doing that. Now, when I say interest, I don't mean in doing what's right. It should always try to do what's right, as should everybody. What I'm referring to is as a nation. And I'm not saying that this excuses it, but at the end of the day, we need the Saudis, and we need them to be a bulwark against the regional expansion of their regional and religious and political rival, Iran. Iran is an enemy of the United States. They're a declared enemy. The Saudis are a declared ally. Of course, there is this schism going on in Islam between Shia and Sunni Islam. The Muslims that are Shias and Sunnis, as I've mentioned on the show several times before, have been gleefully killing each other for over 1,400 years. And the Saudis are the head of the Sunni brand of Islam. And, of course, the Iranians lead the Shia wing of it. And they're at war with each other. They want to dominate each other. Each one claims to hold the right, true path to Islam. I think they're both wrong. I'm not judging what is the right true path of Islam because I'm not a Muslim. It's not of interest to me. But for them to be at war with each other, just like for Christians to be at war with each other, well, that goes against the very teachings of the so-called religion that they claim to uphold. So when we come back after this commercial break, I'm going to wrap up my views on Khashoggi. I had a chance to write them down after feedback from the show, and hopefully they'll be concise and precise this time. And then we'll move on to an update on the political front, and we'll talk about a brand new movement which seems to be sweeping at least the UK, and that is this new diet that's come up we'll talk about, which of course is pure nonsense, but people are into it. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomena, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
Welcome back to Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. So to wrap up my views on the murder of Mr. Khashoggi, it is obvious that this was done at on the orders of the high levels of the Saudi government, if not the highest level, the order of the prince himself. Now his younger brother is coming back to Saudi Arabia. He had briefly left the country as his the crown prince was rising to power. He went to the UK. Now he's coming back, and he's going to try to challenge his brother for some power, and their father may give him some token portfolios and so on. But it seems like there's going to be some fallout against the young crown prince. But will he lose his title, or will he change as a person? Will Saudi Arabia become the kind of country it should be in the future? I'm predicting that it won't be, as long as the royal Saud family continues to run things. We must remember that this is not a democracy. They're not interested in democracy. So companies that want to invest to try to legitimize this government, I have a moral and ethical problem with that. And my views on the Saudi murder of Khashoggi are this. Now, again, these are my views here, for better or for worse. The murder of Saudi journalist and columnist Jamal Khashoggi cannot go unpunished. This issue is irrelevant to the fact that Daily World is a newspaper, and I do write for that newspaper. I have for years. The issue is not about journalism. It's about human morality, which automatically means doing what's right. Now, had Khashoggi been a janitor at a fast food restaurant, there is no moral nor legal justification for ordering him to be murdered. The fact that he was a famed journalist is not what got him killed. Instead, it was his criticisms of Saudi Arabia's now permanently infamous crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, who loves to go by the moniker of MBS. Now, one can argue that his last two initials seemingly now fit him, because where it concerns he and his government's so-called explanations of what really happened to Khashoggi, so far to date, there's been nothing but BS. First, Khashoggi got into a fistfight, if you will remember, and was accidentally killed. That's what we were told. It seems that the 15-member hit squad and that bad attempt at trying to pass off a Khashoggi body double is what caused the fight, right? Or was it the bone saw they brought to the conflict? Who knows? Ask the Saudis. So now their latest explanation is that it was cold-blooded murder. Yes, it was. But who ordered the murder? That is the key question. Most likely, Khashoggi was murdered on the orders of MBS himself, right after or in case Khashoggi refused his generous offer to return to Saudi Arabia and be part of his inner circle. You see, the typical Saudi royal family way, when it's not busy killing its enemies, imprisoning or torturing them, silencing its critics, they like to keep their friends close and their enemies closer. So regardless of whomever eventually gets the official blame for Khashoggi's murder, shamefully, relations with Saudi Arabia, they won't be significantly impacted for the better. In fact, MBS will continue to exercise his ruthless policies unless stopped, despite promising that in 5 years his country will be radically different. Well, of course it will be, if he's successful. Yet MBS's vision is, of course, bereft of what Saudi Arabia could become. He has no problem with the fact that only his family rules the country. MBS doesn't support free, open elections nor a multi-party system. He refuses to allow the Saudi people to choose by popular vote their own government. So if the West pours billions more into his coffers to help him further his tyranny while dispensing token liberties, because they're not real game-changing liberties, the West can no longer deny that its own chest-thumping and so-called morality is hypocrisy at best, immorality at worst. And the latest news out of Saudi Arabia is that they've arrested apparently some 15 women who dared to commit the crime of dressing up for Halloween. This is the new Saudi Wahhabia, folks. Do you want to invest your money there? Do you even want to go there as a tourist and support this kind of regime? Well, if you do, you have that right. But that doesn't make it right. Me, I can't do that. I have a different morality. Okay, we'll come back to this subject as news permits and as the worm turns, meaning there will be yet another formal declaration coming out from the Saudi Wahhabi family, and it will declare whatever and be likely anything but the truth. We'll see what happens. All right, let's switch from the murder of Khashoggi to today's politics. As anybody who hasn't been living in a cave knows, there is an election coming up very shortly. It will be as early as next week, and it is in the United States, and it's going to determine the future, near-term future, of the fate of the so-called free world, or at least the United States. At stake in this election is a rather interesting dynamic because the country is very polarized. It's been polarized for decades, ever since Al Gore lost to George Bush, even though Al Gore won the popular vote. But it became even more polarized when Barack Obama was elected, then got reelected. And then it became even more polarized after Queen Hillary lost the White House to real estate developer and reality TV personality Donald Trump, who now sits in the White House. To add other layers of intrigue to this rather curious dynamic, you have two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. I often call the Democrats Dumbocrats because they do dumb things. And I think when a Dumbocrat acts dumb, they deserve to be called a Dumbocrat. I think it's scientifically accurate, rather than a Democrat, because I think a real Democrat wouldn't do dumb things. Republicans, I often call them Rithuglicans because they do behave in thuggish ways. They constantly after ways to cut benefits for people, especially senior citizens even, and Social Security recipients, even veterans. That's wrong. So I don't support either political party. And let's be honest, if Queen Hillary was the best the Democrats can do, then they are Democrats. And on the Republican side, we have to remember that President Trump beat handily his second closest rival, which was Senator Ted Cruz, who turned out to be a joke. Trump won the primaries by an average of roughly 50%. It wasn't even close. And he was an outsider. In fact, the party, working with people like Mitt Romney and even Ted Cruz, tried to stage a coup to oust Trump to keep him from getting the nomination because they felt he had no chance against Hillary. Boy, were they wrong. So you have a man in the White House who's head of the Republican Party. Even though he's not really a true Republican, the Republicans don't really like him, but in a Faustian bargain they've cut with him. They understand that if it weren't for him, they wouldn't be holding all the levers of power right now. And there's a very good chance that they're going to lose some of that power as early as next week. Now, here's my prediction. I want to say it's based on what I think is understanding as a journalist covering the election. I will say in my defense that one of the few journalists who predicted Trump would win and beat Queen Hillary. I got teased a lot at that at the Daily World newspaper in India because everyone was pro-Hillary in India, and especially in the liberal la-la journalism field, which is dominated by left-wing liberals, unfortunately. They were overwhelmingly pro-Hillary. And I had to hear a lot of crap from them about my predicting Trump would win. But I stuck to my guns and said, look, I'm in touch with a lot of fellow Americans, and I'm reading the mood of the country, and I get the impression he's going to win because it doesn't matter if it's the popular vote. It matters about the Electoral College. That is what Trump's strategy was. He flipped traditionally blue wall states that had always gone for Democrats. He even took the state of Wisconsin, which Hillary Clinton had never won even in a primary. Even Bernie Sanders beat her in that state, as did Barack Obama the first time she ran for president. And, of course, she lost it to Trump and then lied and claimed it was voter suppression that caused her to lose that state and those 10 electoral college votes, which, of course, was a lie. And what's interesting about Hillary Clinton is she remains as unpopular as ever. Her popularity has actually gone down ever since she wrote her weasel word book called What Happened, where it tried to blame everybody but herself for losing. I wrote a book in response to Hillary's book called What Didn't Happen, and it proved that she was lying about why she lost. The real reason she lost is because just enough people didn't like her. That's the short version. And now she may run again for president. And this shows you how stupid the Democrats are. Maybe they should be called stupidcrats, because if she were to run today and declare her candidacy in the Democratic Party, she would instantly be the number one candidate. Isn't that pretty lame? 2 years after she lost again running for president, that the Democrats still can't figure out what they want to be when they want to finally grow up, if ever, and Hillary's the best they can do. In fact, as I tried to tell a lot of people, even in my writings, this is why I wrote a long article. I think it was probably a full page, if not a half page, of the newspaper. It essentially said why America was in serious trouble, and that if Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were the best candidates for president out of a country of 320 million people, then America doesn't have a bright future ahead of it. And I still stand by that theory. So now what's probably going to happen is, according to exit polls, I'm assuming these are accurate as an exit poll can be. An exit poll, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your point of view, is dependent on one simple rule: garbage in, garbage out. In the Czech Republic, for example, as I observed firsthand, is actually a cultural tradition there for Czechs to lie to exit pollers. After they vote, they'll lie to pollsters and say, I voted for so-and-so, when just the opposite is true. And then they love laughing and tuning into the news that night and seeing how the pollsters and pundits make fools out of themselves. Now, I'm not saying that's going on in this election in the U.S., but I have talked to several Americans who have told me that in the last election 2 years ago, they lied to survey takers about who they were going to vote for, and they ended up voting for Trump. So what we're going to do after this commercial break is we'll break down what I predict is going to be the likely outcome of the election, and why that is both good and especially very bad for the future of the United States. And then I will also elaborate on my other half of my prediction, which is that things are going to get a lot worse before they have any chance, however slight, of getting better. We'll be back after this commercial break.
So I was watching the X Zone TV channel last night when I was abducted by aliens, and they kept repeating to me over and over again, simultv.com, simultv.com.
What's simultv.com?
That's what I asked them. They had it written on the side of their UFO.
How do you spell that?
UFO.
No, I mean simultv.com.
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 Right. simultv.com.
Interesting that you were abducted by aliens in a simultv.com UFO last night.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Now that you mention it, I remember now last night I was awakened from a deep sleep. My great-grandmother was standing there. She said she'd come from the hereafter to tell me about simultv.com. She even spelled it out for me.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
simultv.com.
simultv.com, sonny boy.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guys, you'll never guess what my psychic guru just told me.
simultv.com.
Exactly. Are you guys psychic too?
Of course.
We all know about simultv.com. simultv.com.
Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. Once again, executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. All right, let's talk about, again, the election here and my so-called prediction for how I think it will come out. And once again, I want to emphasize that I'm not an expert on this, okay? But I did call the last election correctly. In fact, I beat Nate Silver, who had successfully called all 50 state elections the prior election, 2 elections ago. I called the Trump election properly and predicted that the Republicans would become a supermajority, and they did. And in order to understand the importance of today's dynamic for the upcoming election next week, we have to go back in time a little bit to put it in proper perspective. Now, as I've said before in the show, I miss the old Democratic Party. We're talking about the party back in the 60s of Johnson and Kennedy. I miss the old Republican-style party. I would end it at Reagan and go back to, say, Eisenhower as a good example. This is back when the Republicans actually cared about people, actually cared about developing our infrastructure and our highways, would have decent education, would pay teachers a decent wage. None of that is true anymore. Both the Democrats and Republicans are guilty in that regard. And we have to remember that for the first time in many years, in the majority of the history of the United States, the middle class is no longer the majority of the population. It is, in fact, the minority, meaning the middle class is no longer the largest segment of the population. At least half of America lives at or below the poverty level. And this infamous milestone, if you will, was achieved during Barack Obama's administration. Now, I know that today Obama likes to strut around and crow that he is responsible, quote unquote, for the success of today's economy. You know, Trump has been in power for 2 years now. It's no longer Obama's doing. And while I understand that Obama inherited a mess that George Bush left him with, Obama isn't alone in that sense. It was only a question of to the degree to how serious that mess was. And yes, it was very serious. But what a lot of Democrats conveniently forget, because too many of them are Democrats, is that George Bush inherited a mess, or Al Gore would have inherited a mess had he won that election against Bush the first time in 2000, when the dot-com bubble burst. Remember? The country went into another recession. There were companies that went bankrupt because all of a sudden their stock went from $400 a share down to $4 a share. There was the dot-com bubble burst had finally exploded, or imploded, if you will, and that was long overdue and it was predictable. But that's how Bill Clinton left office. George Bush inherited that mess. And then, of course, the terrorist attack of 9/11 and the stupid debacles of fighting the wars incorrectly in Iran and Iraq hurt the economy more. The economy basically, stumbled along at roughly 2% GDP. And that, of course, was the smallest growth since the Great Depression and peacetime. Peacetime meaning there wasn't a major war going on, as in like the level of, say, at least Vietnam or World War II, certainly. And yet that was the legacy of Obama. And then, of course, we must remember that one of the reasons that Obama even got into office in the first place is because look at his competition. Senator John McCain and Sarah Palin. Are you serious? I don't even have to explain why that's a joke. So, of course, he won. And, of course, the economy being in such a bad state helped Obama. When I heard that he was supposed to deliver on hope and change we can believe in, I told people, even on previous versions of the show broadcast from Europe on Rob's network, that, this is more chump change we can believe in, not real change. And I said this because I don't believe that a Democrat, a hardcore member of the Democratic Party, is capable of being the revolutionary transformational figure that the party loves to lie to voters and mislead them into believing is possible. The Republicans like to do this as well. Political parties do that. They're not going to say, hey, vote for my guy, he sucks. No, they're not. They're going to hype him, see. And, of course, any politician worth their salt is going to buy into that hype because they love the smell of their own farts. Let's be honest. That's the way they are. So now we have Republicans, okay? And we must remember that when the Democrats swept into power under Obama, under this delusion of change we can believe in, they held all levels of power. They had a supermajority. And 2 years later, that was no longer true. And polls indicated that the main reason voters turned against Obama 2 years after he was elected and stripped his supermajority was the way Obamacare was mishandled and bungled. Well, that was also predictable. And then you had an election again a couple years after that. Mitt Romney ran against Obama. Once again, a joke candidate from the Republicans. So, of course, Obama won. But millions of people who voted for Obama the first time didn't vote for him the second time. And the election was really not that much of a – it was pretty close. It was closer than a lot of people think, even though Mitt Romney was a terrible candidate. And hopefully Mitt Romney will never be president. I have the same view about Hillary Clinton. Then you have the current election again. You must remember that in the previous one, the Democrats then lost the Senate. So now they held the White House in the last 2 years of Obama's office. But he was isolated in the White House. The Republicans held the Senate and the Congress. And the Democrats were talented enough to lose 2 out of 3 of their levers of power. And then, of course, in the last presidential election, they lost everything. Hillary didn't win. Trump did. And now you have that dynamic today. Now, I predict that if the polls are correct that indicate this massive, incredible increase in the number of young people who claim they're going to vote in this election in a few days, if even half of these people keep their promise, and you never know with millennials, if they get off their butt and they vote, there's going to be a change. I predict that if that happens, that the Democrats will take Congress, the lower house. They will have a majority, and once again we'll have Nancy Pelosi waving the gavel and crazy politicians like Maxine Waters. Again, the pendulum just swings back and forth. Nothing changes. People expect change from these clowns, but it's not going to happen. But I don't think that the Democrats are going to take the Senate. I think something at the last minute would have to happen that would be a major game changer to empower that dynamic. So if my prediction is correct, we will have what is called, once again, divided government, and that's never good. Some people like to believe that the divided government is good because it forces both parties to get along and compromise. Well, in theory, yeah, that's correct when both parties bother to put the best interests of their nation first instead of their own pockets or their lobbyists. But that's not what goes on in America. And in this case, for this upcoming Congress, regardless of who wins, you don't have just a single party of no. You've got 2 parties of no. Remember, folks, when the Democrats used to bitch about the Republicans and say they're just a party of no, and the Republicans were busted due to secret recordings and leaked memos, that no matter what Obama did, even when Obama was right, just say no. Well, again, that's wrong because you're putting politics before the best interests of the country, but that's what Republicans did, and they deservedly earned the moniker of being the party of no. Well, now the party of no is the Democrats. They're doing the same thing, claiming to be just as self-righteous on the other side of the political spectrum. They're the party of no because, like the Republicans years ago when Obama was in his first years in office, they took that line because they felt that what Obama was doing was wrong, was morally wrong, was immoral, was jeopardizing security and safety of the United States, was treasonous, etc. All the lurid descriptions they love to use today to describe the Republicans. Well, the same filth was thrown the other way by both parties at each other, and now they're both guilty. So what happens when you got 2 parties of no? One party runs one half of the government, the other half runs the other half. Then you've got the president who's just trying to get laws passed. He has to sign them, but he needs Congress to pass them. He needs the Senate to approve them, then he can sign them. Well, you have what's called divided government. And since both of these parties are the party of no, I think it would be foolish to think that they're going to suddenly change that and abandon it and try to find common ground far more than not. I don't think that's what's going to happen at all. In fact, I predict that if the Democrats lose and do not pull off a blue wave, as they're predicting, the Democrats are going to get more angry. There's going to be more violence and calls for violence on the left. More politicians will be disrupted and interrupted and harassed and stalked as they're trying to eat dinner somewhere and just live their lives. I predict that the far right will become more polarized as well, and the country itself will become more polarized because each side is claiming to be the moral conscience and heart or brain of the country, if you will, the soul of America. What that means when they make that claim is that anybody who disagrees with them isn't. In other words, the very dynamic of that statement demonizes an opponent, okay? It reminds me of the game that climate change advocates love to play by misusing the term denier, okay? How that game works is this. What you do is, if somebody doesn't believe in climate change or global warming, or your particular example of global warming, you automatically demonize them by calling them a denier. A denier is somebody who supposedly has a closed mind, who denies facts, denies reality. But what it really means to these people is somebody who disagrees with you. But you don't want to call them disagreeers because that's not a strong enough term. You call them deniers as if they can't handle reality. Well, the phenomenon of being a denier cuts both ways. For it is a fact that over 90% of the British Met climate models were wrong. They were off. They were alarmist. Even Margaret Thatcher, the former British Prime Minister who started the whole global warming thing, called Al Gore an extremist and said this thing is being blown out of proportion. And she wrote about that before she died. It's published in the record, folks. I'm not making this up. So denier cuts both ways. You can deny facts on both sides of it. Either you believe it or you refuse to believe it when you should. We'll be back after this commercial break.
Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, join me, Rob McConnell, as together we'll investigate the world of the paranormal and the science of parapsychology here on the X-Zone Radio TV show on XZBN and the X-Zone TV channel on Simul TV. Since 1990, the X-Zone Radio TV show has been the place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. Together, we'll investigate UFOs, aliens, ghosts, Bigfoot, psychic phenomenon, lake monsters, conspiracy theories, government cover-ups, the truth embargo, alien abductions, ESP, haunted locations from around the world, and so much more. With over 28 years of broadcasting and more than 4,500 individual guests, the X-Zone is truly a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality, as evidenced by the credibility, integrity, and professionalism of the guests that we bring to our international audience. If you have seen a UFO, had a close encounter, seen a ghost, Bigfoot, lake monster, or a story that you would like to share or have investigated, contact me, Rob McConnell, by sending me your email to xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, or you can call toll-free 1-800-610-7035, extension 143, and on Skype, X-Zone Radio TV. For more information on the X-Zone Radio TV show with yours truly, Rob McConnell, visit www.xzoneradiotv.com or www.xzonetvchannel.com or simultv.com and xzbn.net. Until next we meet here in the X-Zone from our broadcast center and studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, always remember, X-Zone Nation, keep your eyes to the sky and your heart in the light.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. free video on demand, live streaming events from around the world, interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is Rob McConnell. Now, as I mentioned before, and this has been my view for years, I don't support either political party. The reason why is because both of these political parties, I'm talking about the Democrats and the Republicans, no other two parties, are guilty 100%. Only them, for the fact that the United States is now $21 trillion in debt. Remember when Barack Obama ran for president, he slammed George Bush for being irresponsible for running the economy and funding a war on a credit card. He said that $10 trillion in debt is irresponsible. Well, Obama was right, and I'm not a fan of Obama, but he was right. On the other hand, what did Obama do in his 2 years in office, 2 terms in office? He ran up another $10 trillion. Now, I understand he had to spend a few trillion, billion, whatever the numbers were. Nobody will ever really know, helping fix the problem that Bush, left him with. Okay, I understand that. But that doesn't explain nor excuse all of the $10 trillion more in debt. And then, of course, Trump has added to that deficit by increasing our debt by another $1 trillion by passing what basically is a tax cut for the rich. It wasn't for the middle class. It was crony capitalism again at its worst. The casino magnate Adelson, according to news reports, made some $400 million in tax windfalls because of Trump. Well, gee, I wonder why Adelson is pumping record numbers of millions back into the Republican Party. It's been very good for him. Plus, he's a hardcore Republican. He has a right to be the way he feels he needs to be. But that's an example of how the tax cut benefited the uber rich and not really the middle class. And then we must remember that the Democrats like to talk about raising taxes, okay, and giving tax cuts for the middle class. Remember the last one that Obama passed? It actually put into the average American's bank account about an extra $1 a month. Wasn't that just fantastic, folks? Didn't that allow you to go buy that car you've been saving up for? So again, both these parties, I don't support them. The country is divided more than ever, and I think it is delusional, outright nuts, schizophrenic maybe, to even argue that one of these two parties is ever going to kick big money out of politics, is going to put the American people first instead of their corporate donors and lobbyists. If you really believe that these two parties or one of them is the answer, the facts are against you. History is not on your side. Instead, what you're doing is you're just pushing the pendulum back and forth. It's swinging back and forth, the same old nonsense, different party, different day, same basic problem. And at some point, that pendulum runs out of motion or momentum, and then it dies and sits in the middle somewhere. And that's exactly what's going to happen if this continues. If I had to pick one word today of what, to me, epitomizes the problem with today's Democratic Party and politics, I would choose this word here. This is a word which I just have to shake my head at again, and it's called flexitarian, okay? Now, what is a flexitarian? Well, believe it or not, in Great Britain, where they love politically correct stupidity as in the form of politically correct English, there's a term for people who are vegetarianisms or vegans. Now, vegetarians and vegans, they don't eat meat, right? But, there's many of them who actually just have to have a bite of a hamburger here and there, or they have to have a hot dog, whatever the source of meat, piece of chicken, piece of fish. And they just can't resist having a little bite here and there. But rather than admit the truth that they fell off the wagon, that they're weak, that they're a wimp regarding their vegetarian vegan duties or perceived higher morality, because, they like to dump that on people, make them feel guilty for eating animal source of nutrition. They like to make you feel guilty that you're savage, you're primitive, it's not good for you. You should instead just stick to plants, nuts and fruits, vegetables and berries, And so when you have these vegetarians and vegans, self-righteous types who don't like to admit that once in a while they just like a good piece of KFC or chicken, so what do they call themselves? They call themselves flexitarians. I'm not making this up. I couldn't make this up. My mind is not that warped. Okay, maybe a lot of things, but it's not that warped. So once again, if you have a vegetarian or a vegan who falls off the wagon, he's still a vegan and a vegetarian, but now he's a flexitarian. He's been flexible during the time he fell off the wagon. Now, apply that to any other term, and you'd say, well, he's a failure. Imagine if you had an alcoholic and he falls off the wagon, he goes and gets smashed in a bar fight, and the next day he's in a hospital. Would you say, oh, that's a flexitarian we have in the hospital here? No, you'd say he's a drunk and he fell off the wagon. Let's call it what it is, okay? But see, vegetarians don't like to say that. They don't like to admit the truth, because if you're a vegetarian to begin with, you're not exactly following science, because the fact is humans are omnivores. You can look up the word omnivore, O-M-N-I-V-O-R-E, for those who don't know how to spell it. It simply means you can swing both ways. You can have meat, fruits, vegetables, berries, nuts, whatever. And thank God people are omnivores evolutionary-wise, because we may not have survived if we had to eat only nuts and berries. And for those who think we shouldn't hunt game, that it's wrong, that it goes against nature, well, I got news for you sunshines out there. We got eyes in the front of our heads. We're predators. Do you think that we have eyes in the front of our heads just for the heck of it? I got news for you as well. Nothing exists just for the heck of it. If it exists, it has at least one purpose. Whatever it is, may have more than one purpose, but it has at least one purpose. Nothing just exists for the hell of it. Think about it. It's basic common sense. Look at a rock. A rock exists because something happened to form that rock. Duh, hello, okay? Volcano, whatever, magma cooled off, it's a rock. And maybe life might develop on that rock, microbes, whatever. They exist for reasons as well. So the idea that, something exists for no purpose, no reason, just because it can, that's ridiculous. It's not grounded in reality. So when I hear terms like, a vegetarianism who falls off the wagon and they're a flexitarian now, only when they fell off, it reminds me of some politically naive dumbocrats who like to rave about socialism and how socialism is going to fix everything. No, it's not. Socialism, based on the judgment of history, which is a pretty good judge, has proven that it doesn't work. It fails. If socialism were doing so great, the conservative far-right parties in Quebec wouldn't be in power now, would they? Nope, but they are. Why? Because it is failing. So when I hear young types talk about socialism because they think it means free education, free medical benefits, it's not that simple, folks, okay? We've talked about this before. The definition of socialism, hopefully for the last time, is when a government controls all the choke points of an economy. This would include the banking. This would include utilities and power and water. Would include the military, of course. Would include communications like TV and radio. You have state radio. They still have these in some countries, even in Europe. So they're holdovers from socialist or past communist systems. Again, it doesn't work. Look at an extreme form of socialism known as communism. It has failed everywhere. Even China today, it has failed. You might say, well, how can you say that when China has such a big, powerful, strong economy? Yeah, it's because they're not really communist. They're totalitarian capitalists. They love making money, and they make billions thanks to the collective stupidity of the West, who loves to give it to the Chinese so they can make goods cheaply. Then China takes that money and uses it to help undermine and destroy the West. That's their business model. But are they communists? No. Are they socialists? Well, they've got socialized, everything, because the government controls everything, including the internet there. So that's real socialism, folks. So my proposal is for those young Democrats, socialists, liberals, independents, whatever you want to call yourselves, who love socialism and think it's a great idea, go move to Beijing, China. Good luck with that. In fact, go move to Cuba. Go try North Korea. Try any of those three countries who no one's trying to copy or emulate, and there's a good reason for that. And I wish you the best of luck. And depending on who you are, I might even pay for your flight. It'll be one way, of course. But that would be my best advice to people who hold these stupid beliefs. It's like they don't even know what the Cold War was. They don't even remember why it was fought, why people died during the decades of the Cold War, what it was about. Again, socialism, communism versus freedom, democracy, and capitalism in the West. So as we wind down this show, my prediction for the election, once again, is that we will have divided government. The country, the United States, will increasingly become the divided states of America, and that more Americans will gravitate towards considering themselves to be independents, meaning they don't support either party. They may vote for either party, depending on who's running, but they consider themselves to be independents. What I'm waiting for is for that final light bulb to go on in the room of the collective American conscience, where it says, we're better than this. We have higher standards. We need to take our country back. And we need to not support these two parties anymore because they are the only people who are responsible for our problems. And we need to put into power instead politicians who will do the job that we have elected them to do, rather than pretend or lie and claim they're going to do it. And then once they get in power, they serve their lobbyists instead of the will of the people. It's like, to use this analogy here, and I really do believe this, I'm not oversimplifying it when I say that democracy is like bodybuilding. You get out of it what you put into it. If you don't go to the gym and you don't build those muscles, you're never going to have a muscular physique. If you don't participate in democracy in a healthy way, you're not going to have a healthy democracy. And while you can still fail and you won't always succeed, you must always at least try. Whether you're using social media or the ballot box and voting, you must at least try. If you love your country, and most importantly, if you love your fellow human beings. We have to make sure that as we go forward, that each generation is left with a better world than the one that you and I grew up in and will die in. We must improve the human race, push it forwards, and leave it better for our children. We'll be back next week with another episode of Cal's Corner Radio here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network.
If you are looking for a safe, zero-calorie natural option to the harmful artificial sweeteners on the market today, Just Like Sugar is what you're looking for. Just Like Sugar is a wonderful natural alternative for those health-conscious people who choose a calorie-restricted diet with a great, pure, sweet flavor that tastes just like sugar. Just Like Sugar is a great natural option for people suffering from diabetes and may be useful in restricted diet programs where standard sugars are not allowed and does not cause a laxative effect of some other sweeteners. Just Like Sugar comprises a perfect blend of chicory root fiber, natural calcium, natural vitamin C, and Just Like Sugar's sweetness comes from the natural flavors from the peel of the orange. Just Like Sugar is a natural alternative to harmful artificial sweeteners and will change the way that you believe all natural sweetener products taste. Just Like Sugar is available at your local Whole Foods markets, Wild Oats markets, Henry's, Sun Harvest, and many other fine natural food stores in the U.S., Canada, and worldwide.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, Sci-Fi, and Horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.